One trend I've noticed over the past few years is that the potential utility and reach of billboards has drastically increased in select cases. When we think about out-of-home advertising in general, and out-of-home referring to a lot of the physical signage you see out there in the world, such as a bus stop that's wrapped in signage, or a park bench that has a phone number on it, or even stuff on taxis or signs in a shopping mall or an arena. Basically, all that signage and advertising out there can fall under the out-of-home advertising category. But in this case, I'm using billboards as the most prolific example. I've seen so many cases of viral content on Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, and all sorts of platforms where somebody will take a video or a photo of a billboard or any sort of signage they saw out in the world, post it with a caption, and all of a sudden that post goes really viral, gets millions and millions of views. And all it really took for that initial advertiser was a few hundred or a few $1,000s for that original physical signage. So the outsized results that they're getting in terms of impressions and reach and virality greatly dwarfs that initial investment. And it's that sort of virality that follows physical advertising into the digital world that I'm really honing in on. I think that's the number one trend that I'm seeing for a lot of billboards and out-of-home advertising in today's age. But before we dive into more examples of that physical to digital world virality, I figured it'd be good to cover just some of the more obvious use cases of out-of-home advertising. The most obvious or conventional usage for out-of-home advertising or billboards is for hyper-local advertising. That's because targeting for out-of-home primarily works in two lanes. One, it is very broadly appealing, meaning you can't hyper-target, say, only teachers or only folks of a certain age. If you have the billboard out there on the block, anybody who goes by is going to see it, so you can't be super nitpicky. But it is targeted in the sense that it's hyper-local. So a billboard on a certain city block is going to target folks who travel by it. And if you're traveling by it, you're most likely living close to it. So billboards might be hyper-localized to the extent of a zip code or a city. And that sort of targeting makes sense for a lot of businesses. So say if you're a local lawyer or a local car dealership or any sort of local service or product, you can slap a billboard on the freeway or a sign on the local bus stop and get a lot of highly qualified leads and folks who are seeing your advertising because they're within that area of your immediate service. On the other hand, we also see a lot of products and services advertised on billboards that are quite location agnostic. So if you think about ads for like an iPhone or Coca-Cola or that new movie that's screening nationwide, they're able to advertise anywhere because their product is available for the most part anywhere. So with that example, we've seen two lanes of targeting. Either you're a hyper-local service that's getting utility out of hyper-localized targeting, or you're such a broadly appealing product that it doesn't matter how local it is, everybody who's seeing your ad is going to be part of your eligible audience. So I also wanted to give a couple other specific examples that I've seen myself in the San Francisco Bay Area. A couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I was commuting to San Francisco every day for work, and I would take the bus and see these buses wrapped in this signage that said Candid on it. It would just say Candid with a picture of a guy or a gal holding these teeth aligners with a beautiful smile, and that's all it was. There was no ad copy at all, but I kind of deduced over time that it was something about, Invisalign-like products. So when I finally looked up the company, it turns out that they had just opened in San Francisco office. So in that case, it made a lot of sense for them to be hyper-targeting San Francisco, because even though it was a product that was shipping direct to consumer online, because they had these hyper-local tie-ins in certain big metropolitan cities, out-of-home advertising in these areas made a lot of sense to support that hyper-local launch. Another out-of-home advertising example I saw in San Francisco, which at the time I thought was pretty ineffective, was the use of out-of-home advertising for a lot of tech startups with super niche products that didn't appeal broadly at all and that weren't hyper-local services at all because they were available to everyone online. So if you think about a company like Brex with their corporate credit cards, I was seeing a ton of their ads on bus signs and billboards, or any sort of other tech startup that does like say AI or data analytics or any sort of insert tech jargon there. If you see their logo and branding and sort of tagline on the billboard, it probably means gibberish to 99.9% of people walking by it. So when I saw stuff like that, I just assumed it was recently funded startups trying to stroke their ego by putting their branding and logos and stuff on billboards. But it turns out I was somewhat mistaken, and there's actually a lot of rhyme and reason for that sort of advertising. If you think about that advertising as sort of a super top of funnel investment, it does start to make a little more sense. Even though 99% of people who see that advertising, it just doesn't mean anything. As long as the key decision makers are within that area, it does start to make sense a little bit. It turns out that in San Francisco, a lot of key decision makers for other startups, other customers of these tech startups, because they're all in the same area, they're going to be traveling the same streets and seeing that sort of signage. And even if they don't retain any information about it, they at least see that logo, they see that signage, and that impression, that initial impression is made. So later on, if that same tech company who advertises on a billboard tries to reach out to this other company who saw their billboard, it's no longer that first approach. It's no longer a super cold call. It might be a slightly warm lead. So I guess that was a long-winded way of saying that billboards can still be effective even if 99% of people don't really care about the product, so long as somebody you're targeting lives within that local area. So going back to my original example, I think that there's something fundamentally ceremonial or symbolic about putting up a billboard. If you've ever seen the movie Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, there's a scene in that where a person walks into an advertising office with a wad of cash to buy a few months' worth of a billboard run. And images like that, at least for me, connect that sort of symbolic nature of putting up a billboard. It signifies that you're making a monetary investment and that you're putting something physical out into the world that's being seen by other people, that's in the physical space. So I think when somebody takes a video or a picture of that, they're showing off that, hey, somebody took the time and the money to put this out into the world, and that's what makes it somewhat viral worthy. I think one great example is with the recent craze around Wall Street bets and GameStop. Average folks were putting up billboards about individual stocks, and these billboards would then go viral on Reddit, on Twitter. And that, I think, is one of the most valuable billboard value propositions today. While I think the vast majority of people aren't putting up physical advertising with the intention of reposting it online, that could be something that's actually going on in a lot of these cases where folks are putting up billboards knowing that they're going to be able to break out and sift through all the noise by providing content that's so unique and interesting. And that's a trend I think we might see in the future, where out-of-home advertising, while traditionally physical, is going to kind of cross those boundaries and be reposted online and vice versa. And I think people are going to start to catch on that to break through the noise, they're going to be able to create these viral moments. And all in all, I'm really interested to see what advertisers hack this process and start to use this sort of out-of-home advertising to their advantage to break through the noise. So yeah, I just wanted to share that thought, and we'll keep an eye on this billboard space in the future.